Welcome to another Brew Con London Brew Talk. Brew Con London is the UK's largest homebrew expo and convention. The Brew Con Brew Talk videos are sponsored by the Malt Miller.
Hi, good afternoon everybody. So when I originally agreed to do a talk on water treatment, I didn't quite grasp that I was going to have to fit the subject into 15 minutes. So I tried to basically pare down what I would normally talk about. As when I first did the talk at London Amateur Brewers, it took me over an hour. What I also found recently was that at Brew Con Leeds, Pete Hughes did a really excellent talk on what's in water. And some of the basics of how to treat it. And so that's up on YouTube now, and I'd really recommend going and watching that, as this is kind of designed as a complement to that talk, because what I'm going to talk about really is just the 3 basic steps that I use and I follow to treat my water for brewing. And frankly, I think anybody, at least in the UK, should be able to follow those steps to treat their domestic water, basically, for brewing. So, first question, do you actually need to treat your brewing water? Now, I think water treatment generates a lot of more disagreement than almost any other subject in brewing when you look at sort of online forums and discussion areas. And the reason for that really is the sort of variation in it. Not quite every house, but if you go a few streets across, they might have a slightly different water supply, a different composition of the water, and so they're going to have to treat it slightly differently. Equally, a certain amount of the water treatment is going to depend upon personal preference and what you're brewing as well. What I would say though is whether you need to really treat your water. Until you're brewing consistent, good quality, fault-free beer, I'd say it's probably something you can forget about. I would look at other areas like fermentation, yeast pitching rates, that sort of thing, first of all. But once you're through that stage, if you want to take your beer from good to really good to excellent, if you want to give yourself a slight extra edge maybe in competitions, and particularly if you're ever thinking of starting up a brewery as a commercial business, it's essential you need to know what's in your water and how to deal with it. So, next slide. So, what are we going to talk about? So for me there are 3 key steps to treating water. First one is to remove chlorine and chloramine from the water. Second is to adjust the alkalinity in your water. And then finally is to adjust the calcium levels and sulfate and chloride in the mash. I'm going to go into each of these steps in detail next. Okay. So what I would say is that for most people you can use your own domestic water. There isn't a need to buy a reverse osmosis system or to buy bottled water or something like that. You can treat the UK water quality for drinking is actually very good. Not so much I believe in the US, but I'm not an expert in that area, but from what I've seen there's very few domestic water supplies in the UK that you can't use for brewing. So, step 1, remove chlorine and chloramine. The easy way of doing this is buy some canned tablets, take half a tablet, crush it, put it in your hot liquor tank, stir it, and that's it, done.
Can you use too much canned tablets?
Yes. So, this leads on to the point, do you need to do this? And some people say the level of chloramine in domestic water is not actually high enough to cause any off flavour. Now, personally, I know that I can taste it in my water. So, or I should say the water that comes out of the tap, not my water. So, if it's there, I kind of want to get rid of it. Now, if you find the beer is really, really phenolic, more than likely that's down to residual chlorine that's been left from cleaning, or potentially an infection. But it can come in at a very low level from your water supply. So if it's there, I want to get rid of it. So that's it really. Second step, adjust alkalinity. So what is alkalinity? A lot of you are probably thinking. Alkalinity is not hardness. When people talk about water hardness, what that actually is a measure of the calcium and magnesium in water. It kind of moves up and down along with alkalinity, because alkalinity is the measure of carbonate and bicarbonate water. And the reason it moves up and down is because most water gets filtered through chalk on its way to you, and that adds calcium and carbonate. So if you get one, you get the other generally. The reason brewers are interested in alkalinity is because it's basically it buffers against the pH change of the mash. So if you have too much alkalinity in your water, you'll end up with a mash pH that's too high. If you don't have enough in there, it will drop too low. So I'll talk again in a moment about what you need to do to adjust it. First of all, how do you find out what your alkalinity is? Now, first thing you do is you could go and get a water report. Brew UK sell water reports that are done by Murphy & Son. Actually, I think they're a really good thing to do because they will give you an idea of everything that's in the water first of all, and give you a good starting point to work from. It also means you can verify that the levels that you've got of all the other ions through the other methods I'm going to talk about here. The second thing you can do, and again I really recommend doing this, is to buy a carbonate hardness or alkalinity test kit. Now generally those are sold for aquariums. There's a picture on the left there of the one which is a Salafet branded one. And you can basically use that. It costs about £9 and the kit you get will last for up to 100 tests. And what I recommend is that you get one of those and you use it to test your water every single brew day. Now the reason I say to test it every brew day is because water supplies, or where the water originally comes from, can actually change. The water company stays the same, but they might switch one day from using a river as a source to suddenly using a borehole. And when that happens, the level of mineral and ions of the water will change as well, and your previous water report that you might have got would then be invalid, and you'd have to slightly change your approach. So by testing for alkalinity every single time, you get a warning as to whether the water composition has drastically changed or not, and whether you might need to change what you're doing or get a new report done. The one thing to note is that when you use these kits, they'll come out in a unit called million equivalents per litre, and brewers tend to work in a different value, which is calcium, or parts per million of calcium carbonate in the water. I'm not going to explain the difference there because that would take 15 minutes alone. But basically, to get between the two values, the value you get from the kit, multiply it by 50, and you get the calcium carbonate value that you need for the next step. So, once you know what your alkalinity is, the water at my house is 250 parts per million. You want to adjust it down into the ranges you can see at the top of this slide. In some cases you might need to increase it into those ranges. What that will do is give you roughly the right amount of alkalinity to cause the pH and the mash to fall into the right zone. Generally I would say that pale beer would be about 30 parts per million of alkalinity, and then that goes up through to very dark stouts and things like that where you might have 120 or even 150 parts per million. And that value will depend really upon the amount of crystal and roast malt that you use in your grain, in the recipe. The more you use and the darker it is, the more alkalinity you're going to need to keep the pH high enough. Otherwise it will be very acid and come down low. The way you adjust alkalinity is by using acid. Because that's the way I recommend using it. It's the simplest form. You can buy what's called AMS or CRS, which stands for Carbonate Reduction Solution, from various homebrew suppliers. And what that is it's a food grade blend of sulfuric and hydrochloric acid. It's very safe. I wouldn't pour it on yourself, but it's very safe to use generally. And what you need, what you'd use is per 1 milliliter in 1 litre of your brewing water will reduce alkalinity by 183 parts per million. This is where you need to get your calculator out or a spreadsheet, or there's various brewing calculators online that can help with this. But I'll just put the numbers up there to try and help with. CRS will also add a little bit of sulfate and chloride into the water, not too much to worry about though. In terms of other acids, you can use lactic acid, you can use phosphoric acid. They come with other effects as well. Lactic acid can introduce a slight lactic flavour, can do, but then I was talking with Robbie Gaston earlier and he said he used it for a lot of his beers and doesn't see any issue, so there you go. It's not something I've worked with though. So in my case, I have 250 parts per million calcium carbonate. If I want to brew, say, a porter, and I want to get the alkalinity down to 80 parts per million, for every litre of water I'm using, I would use 0.93 millilitres of CRS. If you need to go the other way and increase alkalinity a little bit, if you have water that is fairly soft and has fairly low level alkalinity, then you can use a bit of sodium bicarbonate, which adds carbonate as well as some sodium. You can also use slaked lime in the mash, although that's a bit more difficult to get hold of sometimes, and I'm not entirely sure about the level of usage of it, but those are two areas you could look into. The most important thing though is that once you've done this and you put it all into your mash, you waited about 10 minutes, you need to test the pH in your mash. If you don't do that, then everything else you're doing, you don't actually know what the result is. Yes, you can see that beer fermented correctly and everything else, but you really do need to take a note then of what the pH was on your brew day. So what you do is wait 10 minutes into the mash, take a small sample of the liquid, cool it down to room temperature, and then test it, ideally using an electronic pH meter. You can buy pH strips, which are fairly cheap. The problem for me is, at least when I found them, is that the narrow range ones you need for brewing have a colour scale which ranges from sort of a light straw colour through to brown. And when you then dip that in a brown liquid, it's very difficult to tell what the pH has actually come out at. So a pH meter is a really sound investment to make if you're interested in this area. In fact, I'd say it's almost essential.
Can I just ask, why do you use a sparge for low ppm?
Okay, sorry, yeah, I didn't mention that. So if you are a fly or continuous sparger, so you go have a long sparge period instead of, say, batch sparging where you just put in a batch of water, mix it up and drain it off straight away. If you're doing fly or batch sparging, then ideally you want to bring the alkalinity of that water right down. And the reason for that is to avoid the pH creeping up in the grain bed. The problem is if it creeps up, you can start to extract tannins, which will give you a slight astringent flavour, a slight astringent off taste in the beer. So if you can bring your alkalinity right down, you almost completely avoid that.
Does the temperature of water make any difference to the test ingredients you make?
You should, so as I mentioned, you should, before you test the pH, so do you mean the pH or the alkalinity?
The alkalinity.
I don't know, to be honest. I've only ever tested it at room temperature.
The reason I'm asking is because I use it all in one big kettle, and then I use my mash water, and then I use whatever left as my sparge, but I keep it hot. So I'm then going to test it for this mash, and then retest it for the sparge, get it down to 30.
Well,
I don't want to cool it down.
If you use that alkalinity test kit,
yeah.
You use 4 millilitres of water to do the test with.
Yeah.
So that cools in a cold glass in seconds.
Fair enough.
So yeah, it's very quick and easy to do.
Cheers, thank you.
No problem. So right, you've got your alkalinity down. So you should have that should basically allow the mash to fall into the right zone between about 5.3 and 5.6 measured at room temperature. That will increase the enzymatic activity for how long they work and hopefully increase the level of extraction you get and also potentially the completeness of the fermentation as well. It can also have beneficial effects down the line in the final pH of the beer. It can also protect from infection. There are various other reasons as well. As I said, read Pete Hughes' watch Pete Hughes' video on this. It's very, very good. So the last step, step 3, is to adjust the level of calcium and then the sulfite and chloride ratio in the finished beer. So how do you know your calcium levels? That was quite simple. Again, you've either got a water report already, If you don't have a water report, a very quick way of doing it is to multiply alkalinity by 0.4. That will get you close enough. It's not exact by any means, but it will get you close enough. The lab report will be much more accurate. You get the sulfate and chloride levels, again, from either from your lab report, or if you go get the local water quality report from your water company, it should have sulfate and chloride levels on there. You can see on the right there, I've got the water quality report from Bermondsey. It's not probably very clear from where you're sitting, but looking at there, they've done sort of 8 tests during the year. You can see the minimum and maximum levels, and it only varies by about 10 parts per million. So I would just take the mean value from that, and that's again close enough for our purposes. In this case, it was about I think 48 parts per million of sulfate and 43 of chloride. So that's how you get those. How you adjust everything? Next slide. So you adjust it by adding in some calcium chloride or gypsum. So again, these are readily available salts you can buy from most brewing suppliers. First thing you want to get right is the calcium level. You want more than 100 parts per million of calcium in the mash. And again, that protects the enzymes and leads to proper conversion. Calcium does get lost through the mash. Now, whether you use gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, or calcium chloride, depends upon what the final balance of the beer you want to have. More sulfate will lead to a drier, crisper beer. More chloride will lead to a fuller and sweeter beer. From my point of view, actually, I think most beers would benefit from a very slight chloride balance, but it's very much personal preference. Some people prefer it the other way. I suspect if I did beers 2 different ways, as I had originally planned for this talk, but it was ran out of time, that it would probably be split fairly evenly as to who preferred which version of the beer. So it's really up to what you want. So you add in the calcium chloride or calcium sulfate. I've got the numbers there to how you adjust it to boost up calcium in the mash. If you already have, or if you have less than 100 parts per million of calcium in the mash, then add the salts half into the mash, half into the boil. Otherwise, if you've already got enough calcium, I would just put it all in the boil. Yes?
Just drink the water with CRS and affect the calcium?
No. CRS purely combines bicarbonate and bicarbonate to reduce it in the water. Yeah, calcium stays in there. That's one of the reasons why I tentatively would say not to use phosphoric acid, because if you put phosphoric acid in the hot liquor tank, as the temperature goes up, it can actually precipitate calcium out at that point. So that's why I kind of say don't use that, but I've not had that issue myself, but then I've only used phosphoric acid once before, so that's what I'd say about that. So sorry, back to the last thing really was the sulfate and chloride balance. Before you agonise over whether you want 10 parts per million or 20 parts per million of sulfate in there, know that the actual brewing process overall will actually contribute a lot of both. Typically it can be between 150 and 250 parts per million of both. So when you're trying to adjust the balance, you're more talking about you want to be adding in 100, 150, 200 parts per million, one or the other. So that's it really.
So you're talking about the chloride sulfate balance in the finished beer?
Yes. Yeah, so sorry, that's the chloride and sulfate ratio in the finished beer is what you're looking to adjust there. But yes, it will, from the malt and the hops and the yeast, I don't know what's causing it, but when people have tested finished beers, and I've seen water analysis of 100 or so different beers, and I was gobsmacked by the amount of chloride and sulfate in them. They can't all be throwing that amount of gypsum and calcium chloride in there, but no, it actually comes about from the brewing process. And that is it, basically. So, just go on one more step. So there, basically 3 steps to treat your domestic water supply. Should work for pretty much anybody. Use half a Camden tablet to remove chlorine. Adjust your alkalinity to get the right level for your beer, and then finally adjust the level of calcium, sulfate and chloride in finished beer with some gypsum malt, calcium chloride. That's it. Any questions?
Yeah. So on one of the slides at the bottom, you mentioned testing pH in the mash
Yeah.
or whatever. So you tested it, and it's one way or whatever.
Yeah.
Then what?
Write it down and change it next time.
Okay.
So sorry, the question there, if anybody had, was if you test the mash pH and it's not where you want it to be, what do you do? The answer is basically write it down and then change it for the next beer. By the time you cooled down the sample, tested it, and the pH meter settled in the right zone, so they do take a little while to get to the right reading, the horse is bolted, you cannot close the gate anymore. At that point, you basically write it down and adjust it for next time. If it's too low, you want to leave a bit more alkalinity in your water. If it's too high, you want to have a little less in there.
What are Burton salts? They must be one of are they chloride sulfide?
Sorry, what was that?
What are Burton salts?
Oh, okay. Burton salts, or sometimes I think it's like DLS, it's called, it's one of the commercial names, are a mix of calcium chloride, gypsum, and other things. I don't know what's in them. You can buy them discreetly, so I just buy them that way. And to me, it's kind of just throw in a bit of this, and I don't know what you're getting out of it. I prefer to take and weigh them properly. Yes.
Hey, we want to brew an IPA. What's the best place to find a resource of the desired water profiles?
Personally, I would go on the side of having more chloride in there, so end up with a.
Is there a resource to find, like, you need this level of chloride, you need, like, a place where you can see what every style should have?
No.
No.
No, there's no. So two things I should talk about. One is water profiles. Beware historic or local water profiles that you're trying to match, because you don't really know whether the brewery that was using that water in Dortmund or Köln or wherever actually did something to that water, adjusted the water themselves before they used it. The other side is then, what's the right profile for my beer? Unfortunately, it's personal preference. Try it, adjust it, rebrew it. That's kind of what I'm saying. Get the other things right first of all, and then you can look at the water. Right? Please, I'll come to you in a moment.
What do you feel is the ideal pH level for sort of rice spotting?
What's the ideal pH level for fly sparging? You don't want to go over 6, but to be honest, I've never fly sparged, so I'm going to admit there I don't know. I believe it's though you kind of want to avoid going over 6. Sorry?
5.5.
Fraser says 5.5, so I do what Fraser does. There's one more question over there.
Yes. Does boiling the water does that help with things?
So yes, boiling the water help? Boiling the water can help precipitate calcium carbonate. So you reduce the level of calcium and carbonate in the water. What you need to do is boil it, let it cool a bit so you actually see the white precipitate form and drop out, and then rack the water off of that. Because otherwise you leave it in there, and when you heat it back up, it'll probably redissolve and raise the alkalinity again. You can do it, but it's a lot of work and use a bit of energy to boil that volume of water for a while, for half an hour or so you need to do it. So I don't know if anybody here uses that as a technique, but for me, I'm a little bit lazy, and just dipping a bit of acid in is a lot quicker and easier for me.
I used to, and then put gypsum. That was my. But now, but I just wondered whether the boiling kind of helped in this process, and whether it cut out.
Yeah, I mean the only other bit is it can help remove a bit of chlorine, but the chloramine tends to stick around a little bit more. But again, it's probably at low enough levels that it doesn't matter. Any other questions? Great, hope you enjoyed it.